I got Mars in the 5th house. So Mars in the 5th house, right? Mars is a planet of action. You know, how you move about, how you go about doing things. Do you listen to your gut instinct? Do you do, or do you think before you do something? You know, that Mars sign will tell you if you do that or not. Are you driven by your emotions? You know, do you make yourself, are you a passionate person about something, and when you do something, you know, it just makes you feel alive, you know, because you feel challenged, you accept challenges and shit a lot, you know. People who have this placement do that, right? They like to accept challenges and, you know, face them head on, you know, typically, you know, but some people face them different ways, right? Because it's different Mars sign, different person. But the 5th house, right? That's the house of joy, entertainment, recognition, you know, creativity. So we have the 12 zodiac signs in Mars through this house, the 5th house. Mars in Aries. If we know about Mars in Aries, this is a great placement to have. That's the home placement for Mars. You are a person who don't think too much. You decide to do something, you do it, and you do it with an intensity. The passion's there. People see that. People are like, oh shit, this guy likes to fight. This guy likes to play sports. This guy likes to challenge himself physically. You know, and he ain't gonna let anything get in, you know, stop him. If once he, you know, is on his way, he's doing it. You know, direct path to success. You know, and they know how to find that. It's just a gut instinct they have, and they go off of it. You know, they don't really give a fuck about what you think about it. You know, you might say, some people might call these people selfish because they just do things and they don't think about other people. But they get results from what they do. You know, they worry about that second. They worry about all that shit second. They go after what they want, do what they gotta do, and your feelings and all that shit don't really matter. This is Mars energy. They're, you know, true Mars-like people. Since it's in the 5th house, you're actually, you know, credited with being, you know, cool. Or not cool, but, you know, somebody that people respect. People try to, you know, emulate you in that way. They try to not think so much and just do. You know, when you have a goal to achieve, right, Mars and Aries, you just go after that shit. The first thing that comes to mind, or your first gut instinct, you do that. No matter what anybody says, there's not any real thinking going into it, if you're being honest. So, you know, there's a little bit, but not too much. You know, it's not like you're gonna ever tell yourself to not do something. You're not gonna talk yourself. You ain't gonna let it get to that point. You're just gonna do it. You're a bit impulsive that way, right? But people like that about you because these other people or your friends or whoever likes you for that. They ain't doing that. They don't have the guts to, you know, just do something, just start something and not give a fuck about what anybody else has to say about it. You know, they get inspired. They get inspired by you. You know, through the actions you take. You know, you're more aggressive about it, more, you know, assertive. But you're just naturally like that. You've always been that way since you were a kid, and into adulthood. That actually has helped you out. Of course, you have to meet challenges head on, but you like that. That's the thing you like about it, you know, because you've naturally always been that way. You're always looking to, you know, start some shit, you know, and it ain't necessarily, you know, always a volatile thing. But if it has to be that, well, you'll meet that shit head on. You won't, you know, back down from a challenge, and people respect you for that. They love being around you for that because it inspires them to want to be like you in that way. And you can be like any sign with Mars and Aries, by the way, an aggressive action taker. You know, when you have goals and other things to do in life, you're gonna make sure that shit happens. You know, you'll let people know what the fuck, and you'll even let people know. You know, that's what Aries does. It's an extrovert. It's like, this is what I'm doing. I don't give a fuck about that. I'm doing this. Da, 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 da. And then, and like, not even da, 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 da. You ain't even talking. You're just doing what you're gonna do. You know, you might Once you achieve your goal, be like, yeah, I won, da, 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 but you're doing that because certain people, people who, think too much, people who um, might be jealous of you because you move and you don't think about it, but then you achieve, great things. They're like, how does a guy who's, somewhat stupid or somewhat idiotic get that? You're like, I had the guts to, take the first steps. I had, way. I was just about my, you know, goals, about what I want to achieve. I meet challenges head on. I don't run away from it. And people like it for that. Now the next sign, and you're also very creative, and you probably have kids too. But with the kids, you might have some issues with that. Um, again, that's aggressive energy, impulsive energy. You kind of like fun sometimes, but then you can also be at odds with each other. But anyways, the next sign is Taurus, Mars in the fifth house. Taurus, Mars in the fifth house. You move patiently. You look at things for what they are, and you look at things and you're like, if it's too risky, you ain't gonna take that risk. More than likely, you're not gonna take a risk. Now, if you really are dead set on an idea or something you're trying to accomplish, and you see the you see real moves that you can take, to get there. You're not running off of anybody else's hype. It's like something you, as a person, want to do, something that you want to have. And things drive you too. That's another thing. Like physical things drive you to um, achieve what you want. So like it could be cars, it could be a house, it could be certain clothes you want to wear, certain all kind of things. You know that shit drives you, right? So to some people that's like a turn off because to them it's like they feel as though or they see it in a way that's like, oh well, you don't care about human interaction, you just care about getting the result. But that's what drives you. That's the type of guts you have. When you decide you want to do something and like you feel like you want to do that achieving that thing that you want is gonna like lead to like better comfort, better life, and you've decided to do that, nobody's gonna change your fucking mind. You're consistent too, patient and consistent. You might be met with people who don't want to fucking help you out, or you don't want people to help you out because they don't understand, or you think they don't understand what you're trying to accomplish. Like, let's say you want a car, right? And you have to, work a certain job, or have this amount of money to get it. Those people were like, oh well, I can help you out. I can, you can work this job and then get this car. No, you don't want that car. You want another car. You want this car. It might be more pricey. Other things, but you want that one. You wouldn't let somebody tell you that you can't achieve that goal. They might try to tell you shit like that. And then you're like, no, I need this. This is what I want. This is what I set out to do, and I'll do it myself because. And you also might shut down help from other people too because of this one thing right here. You see it as, how dare you say that I can't achieve that on my own? You act like I'm saying I need help in that way. I don't need help in that way. Maybe I just need a bit of information from you about how to get this specific thing, and that's all. And then I'll achieve it. I'll do what I have to do to get it right. Achieving that goal is what your focus is, right? When you're locked in on what you want to do, and that could be anything. That could even be with like ladies or guys. If you like to fuck around and stuff, right? So you have a specific thing you like, beauty. If it appeals to your senses, you're gonna do for it. But if it doesn't, uh, probably not gonna do shit at the best of your ability. You probably work slower. Like if you work 9 to 5, you probably work slower. But then when you're doing something you like, you're actually doing it with more, passion, or and people see that and they're like, the people who really love you and shit and are really cool about you, they're like, yo, you just do what you like to do, man. Because guess what, or girl, because guess what, you probably, achieve, you know, the things you want out of it and other things. You'll get the things you want out of life and other stuff, right? And of course, you still meet challenges, right? Because it's slower, you have to feel a certain way about doing something before you do it. But then when it comes to like, the things you want, you don't care what kind of feelings you're going through as you're, going towards that goal, achieving that house, because you set out to do that. So you're gonna, make that happen. And then once you achieve that, you're gonna feel so much better because you set that goal and then you achieve that. Even when people would doubt you, but you didn't give a fuck. You still did what you had to do. Now the next sign is Gemini Mars. Gemini Mars in the 5th house. And those Taurus people, you might have kids too. You find somebody beautiful or, hot, look, or whatever your idea of, beautiful is. You probably have kids with them. Not as much trouble with the kids, but could be because, Taurus is also a possessive sign. So they, if they like something, they sometimes hard for them to let go. But the next sign, Gemini Mars in the 5th house. Gemini Mars in the 5th house, you like to communicate with people. You like to make plans with people to achieve your goals. To you, it's like, it ain't that you can't do shit by yourself. You have certain plans. You can plan things out, do things, but then also you like to create a network to, a group of people. If I'm like into, because you like specific things, right? Or you try to accomplish a specific task, you're going to look for people who are knowledgeable in that task or on these subjects, right? That you want to learn about. And then when you learn about them, you become better. You make your money. Find the people you want to find, but you learn from books and other people who you deem intelligent. You're like, I'm not just gonna listen to anybody. So you see an idiot or somebody who's more impulsive, you might listen to them at times for certain things, but then at other times you won't listen to them, and you'll listen to people who actually study, go to school, people who buy the books, know rules and regulations, know all kind of things because they read books and they go to school and they do that kind of thing. And then you also listen to the other people who don't, who are more street smart. You do both, but you're more inclined to listen to the book smart people, than the other people, because it's safer, and to you in the long run, it's you don't like to take risks too much. But you could be convinced though by somebody who is a little book smart and street smart to take risks. You could be convinced, if they talk right, it sounds logical, and you're like, okay, what, I think I'll take you up on that, and I'll do things this way to achieve my goals. And then when it comes to um, fucking around, you like to have a little bit of conversation first beforehand. You like communication with the people you're with. But that's also another thing. You like to talk, tease a little bit, or you have when you have that kind of attraction towards somebody, sexual kind of attraction towards somebody, you're very witty. You know, you know how to communicate. Through your voice. You talk really well. They know what you want to do and other things, right? But it's not always about that. It's sometimes just sometimes you guys ain't so gung ho about that shit. But when you are, you are. and you know how to do your thing. You have to kind of talk a little bit though if you have Gemini and Mars to like get to like that kind of thing. Um, and like because you value communication and people like you for that and they recognize you for that. You're a team player. That's basically what it is. You're a team player. Even if you yourself might not see it that way or describe yourself that way, maybe, but you probably would describe yourself that way. Honestly, you would, because you know that one person can't do everything themselves. They sometimes have to, go out and interact with other people, learn from them, and then you have that connection for later. This person taught me how to do this. I can always call them back later, and they're like a friend. You see the importance of that, and they see that you're like them, and they respect you for it. When you do something, you think before you do it, and they actually like you for that. People recognize that about you and like you for that. You consider, a lot of things before stepping into anything kind of risky. Now the next sign is Cancer Mars. Sign is the fall of Mars, so this is like one of the worst placements to have. But you can still make shit happen. It's because you care about people a lot, and when you care about somebody a lot, you can get lost in having somebody there. You need people around you, people you're deeply connected to. That could be family, friends, close, somebody you really love, right? And you're trying to do things with them. You're trying to build shit with them. You're trying to build a life you want with them. You're trying to, you know, achieve things that you want with them. But then sometimes you find yourself on the not receiving end, meaning, or you don't see that you are receiving things, because you might feel like your emotional needs ain't being met. When it comes time to like grind, you might, feel like, you're being dismissed. Of course, you're being dismissed. If there's a task that needs done, they're focused on the task at hand. They ain't focused on you. But if you can find people, because sometimes it's like this too with you, with Cancer Mars. You just will stay in a relationship with people that you deem to be, you have a deep connection with and other things. Just because being alone would be worse off. I need to be with somebody. If I'm not with somebody, that's worse off. I'm worse off if I'm alone. You also being in, a relationship with somebody and working with people, if you have negative emotions, fueling you, people around you get that too. It affects, your work environment, the people you're trying to, build with, do things with. So if you're negative, it's gonna, wash off on them. And it does work like that for cancers and shit. That's why it's in debt. Shit can fall apart fast if you're like negative about shit. Now, if you're positive about things and you also pick the right people to, be connected to and be friends with, you don't mind playing that supportive role, just as long at some point in the relationship you get what you want out of, things, whether that be, pleasure, some type of physical item, or just, great deep conversations that happen between you and the people you care for, but at the right time and other things. I don't want to see you need your hand held, because that's not what it is. It's that you feel the need to like just be connected to somebody else. You need to be around people. You need to have, and it ain't being around people, not people, specific people, people that you feel understand you on a deeper level, that kind of thing. And that's not like everybody, because you're not. That's not an extrovert person, right? It's not like you need everybody around you. No, you need people around you who understand you on a deeper level. And with those people, you feel like you can work with them more than other people. And then when you like feel like when they're gone, you start thinking negative things like, oh, what did I do to cause that? And then that slows you down on what you have to do when you're alone. But then when they come back around and you're, seeing them more often, you start to, do things better. You're more passionate, you're more creative, that kind of thing. But when you live your life and you understand that sometimes, you have to, be away from people, and you'll have to come to learn that. Um, you learn how to, adapt, and you're still that kind of creative person. And then when they come back around, they're like, hey, I like that person. They're very, um, understanding of me, and they're also, kind of interesting. They're, creative in their own kind of unique way, or whatever. In the arts and all that shit. So people will remember you, but only the ones who like, actually have that deep connection to you, like doing things. And just don't get salty when people ain't around, and try not to bring negative energy into your, relationships. You'll be all right. And you probably will have kids with somebody too. And that, cancer energy, yeah, you'll have kids with somebody. Um, the next sign is Leo, Mars in the fifth house. This is, very playful energy. You're like the child. You like to be the entertainer. You like to be the one who's, hey, I'm here. I do this. This is what I do. You know, like it or hate it, but I know you like it. That kind of thing. Um, and you're like also aggressive, powerful when you move. You also make sure you do things to the best of your ability, and you want people to see that when you do things. This could be sports, this could be acting, this could be any fucking thing, any kind of actions you take in life towards your goals. And you're aggressive, you're loud, you're proud about what you do and what you can accomplish. To some people, that may come off as arrogance. Challenges come through like in that kind of way because they're like, you're a fucking arrogant prick. Let me put you in your place. But then you're also one who's like always out there and shit, right? Or when you like something and you are always, when you like something, you are out there. So like, let's say, because like I knew somebody who was an introvert who had this. When you like to do something, let's say it's sports, fighting, any kind of thing that's physical or goal oriented, you try to be the best at it, and you usually are. People take note of that, specifically if you have Mars in Aries or Leo in the fifth house. Because like even if you're an introvert, just what you do, it's loud. You just make crazy plays. The way you box somebody up, if you're a boxer, it's just like, god damn, like people are just saying that when they see you, they're like, damn, you were like not letting up on that guy. You were like gonna kill that guy. The fucking referee had to pull your ass off. You fight with the intensity, but it's loud. It's very passionate too, much like Aries, but you're not as direct sometimes. You like to do it to be like, here, this is what I do. You know, I'm the king of this shit. You know, I'm the best at this shit. I make sure I show up every time. People are like, that everybody does understand that you're like that. They understand that. Like people who hate you understand that. People who love you understand it, and they do. They understand you're that fucking guy. You're that bitch that does whatever they do. The haters come to challenge you. Your friends come to challenge you. You don't give a fuck. You'll beat them. You know, you'll challenge them. You'll take that head on, right? Especially if it's something you like. You know, it being fixed fire. The more you like it, uh, you know, the more likely you're gonna beat them at whatever challenge is presented to you. Um, because it's fixed fire. If you like something, a lot. You gotta make sure you know the most about it. Um, you know, you're the most, joyful and happy about it. And it ain't like you're trying to push people away either. You like having people around you to see and celebrating your accomplishments, that kind of thing. It ain't like you try to push people aside, or you're trying to like shy away from the spotlight. That's definitely not what you're trying to do. And then you're also, very creative. You get people involved in the things you're trying to accomplish when it comes to, other things that ain't so like physical. Um, or it might not be as physical. But you also probably have kids too. If you have this person, they just, they fall in love with that, fiery, um, gutso that you have, towards things. You know, do it with a certain passion, and it's like you're always like that. It's not like something that ever goes away. Leo's like the sun. The sun always comes back around, and it's always there. And like people hear you, know what you do, consistently see it, right? They're like, oh, that's that guy, that's that girl. Keep doing that shit. Um, and people really like being around you for that. And they could lead to you having kids, right? If you have Mars and Leo in the fifth house. And if not, you're creative in other ways. You might be a social media influencer, very known. Or people just might put cameras on you, and then you become a, icon or a sensation somehow because they just want to know about you. You seem to be like one of the better people in that field or arena, whatever you're in. Um, but then there's Mars in Virgo. Mars in Virgo in the fifth house. These people like to, take specific steps towards a goal. Um, you plan things out very, methodically, this specific step first, then this step, and this step, and this step, and then the goal is achieved. And you're taking that path. Now, you also do plan for, and you plan for hiccups, road bumps. So then you'll have path B. Let's say an idiot comes up and, they um, fuck me up during step 3 when I'm trying to buy a house or do something like that. Or, just in anything you're trying to do, because, we take all kind of actions every day towards money, towards people, towards trying to get to a certain place, and you want to take a specific route, Now it's all right, we have um, time for, we can be somewhat flexible, right? And that's okay. And you'll still be a little pissed because you wanted to take a specific route. But then you're like, okay, all right. I didn't want to have to, go down, plan B route, but I can, that's fine. I can meet that, I can still, do what I have to do. You're still, calm, cool, and collected about it. It's when, chaos, comes every time. And that happens when you have too many, people around that you um, care about, maybe. Or maybe you're trying to accomplish a goal that is tough and you might need more people involved. And you don't mind talking to people and, getting help when you need to, learning from other people, learning where you could improve in other things. It's just, the chaos is always there, right? And Mars is a chaotic energy. With Mars, it's like, impulsive, um, very to the goal. It's not about all the details, because you could get lost in the details. What if somebody says this? Then I'll have to do this. If somebody says this, then I have to do that. And it's like you're thinking about these things a lot, which, you know, you probably shouldn't do. But you try to stay away from not having the ground come out beneath you. You know what I mean? You don't like being too risky. You know, you really don't. You like to eliminate risk. That's what you try to, and you move like that. But it don't mean you don't achieve your goals. You achieve the goals and the things you want in life. You definitely do. Um, you just don't like doing things in a very chaotic way. It ain't like you think about people. There's idiots in this world. There are smart people in this world. There's smart people I can get information from. The idiots I might try to stay the fuck away from. They might see that I'm interesting. I have to, talk to them politely to get them away from me. But if they insist, we might have to come to blows or whatever. I don't know, but and it ain't that you don't know. You know that that's a possibility. You try to eliminate that kind of thing. So you might even try to come off as more boring in that situation, so these idiots don't find you. Um, when smart people talk to you, you'll take the criticism and shit. You don't mind being critiqued, and then adapting and doing something differently. But if you have to do that shit too much, you might be upset because it then becomes you questioning your whole plan, and how you had things laid out. Was I even on the like right path to get to where I wanted to be in the first place? That kind of thing. You don't want to be doing that. You'll tell yourself, no, you ain't. You're just listening to this person, this person. But because you listen to people and plan things out and look for the small details, you get lost in the details. That slows you down. But people like you still because you take shit very seriously when you move. You do not take steps just because I can do it or because I want to. You question things, you look at things first, and then you act. Then you take action. And people respect you for that shit. They do. That's why it's Mars in Virgo in the fifth house. They actually respect you for it. They recognize you for that. Whereas somebody else says, whereas I would just do something, you're gonna take, a step back first and really, know if you want to feel like you want to do it. Not just that, if it makes sense to even do that, like logically makes sense, Is there risk involved? Is there not risk involved? Will this hurt me in the long run? All this kind of stuff. But they like you probably because you're more safe, than other people. That's probably why they respect you. And then you also make sure you're on your P's and Q's at all times. You make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's. Keep doing that because that's what you do. And people do recognize it. But anyways, the next sign is Libra Mars. Libra Mars, that's in detriment. That's the opposite of a home placement. So, you think about things before doing stuff, right? And I know because I have this placement. And when you think about things, it's like, you have a lot of things you might want to do. I want to try. All these ideas come to you. You don't want to think about, all these ideas all the time. You don't want to be like, okay, I want to do this, but then I also want to do this. And you're just sitting there passively, looking at your thoughts, that kind of thing. You want to be like, this is option A, this is option B. we're gonna take option B and just go with it. That's what you want to do, you know, because you're gonna do that, right? You're not gonna be like the Aries and just do the first thing that comes to mind, right? You're going to always be like that, where you have multiple interests, things you want to try, and then you're like, oh, well, I can't do that now. I don't have certain conditions ain't met. I might not have the right amount of money or the right amount or the right people around me at this time. So I'm gonna do this plan. Just make sure when you do a plan, you just go with that. You know, play that out. Do it. You plan to do it through plan A, and then you learn something from that too, because you're also a smart person too. You think things through a little bit. It's like, do I feel like doing it? And then there's other options, but don't think about those other options too much. Pick one option, do it. Once that's done, um, you play through that route, then you can try another option if need be. Because maybe you find this route and then you just like it, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna keep doing that, because like I gain a lot from that, a lot more knowledge, a lot more people come to me, and you like to have people around too. You like to interact with people on your journey when you're trying to achieve your goals and other things. Um, and people like you too because you're not always loud per se. You might have something to say, um, but they don't hate you for it. They don't hate you because you have something to say. You know, um, you might offer new insight for somebody else. You're a person who has probably multiple interests, um, and it can be hard for you because you have all those interests. And then you also might talk yourself out of doing certain things, or you might tell yourself, "Man, that might never be," but that's just you now. And there is always something for you to do. See, I know this because I have this placement. There's always something you can do in the present moment. So remember that too. Don't just like sit and wait for conditions to like be perfect. Wait for the right people to show up. You're still a person by yourself. Alone, you're still somebody. So you have to do something. There's always something for you to do. It's just then for you to act on it. Maybe you wanted to go somewhere. Then go somewhere. Go somewhere. Don't think about going somewhere. Go somewhere. You wanted to read a book or learn a new skill. To learn that new skill if it's available to you in the area. You know, but don't sit, wait for things that make it happen. And people like you too because you're not too disruptive. You're not disruptive. That's the key with you. Being a Libra Mars, you're not disruptive. Um, things might seem that way to some people, but it's not even like that because you're not going into something, starting shit with people, in an aggressive way. You're coming in calm. You're like, hey, can I, bother you with this for a second, or I want to learn this, who wants to teach me, maybe you want to learn martial arts, and you go in and ask the person if, they can teach you, but you don't have enough money or something, and you try to work something out with them because you're good at like talking and other things. But let's say it don't work out, then you're just like, okay, whatever, you have something else you're interested in. So you're then, searching on that, that might hurt or whatever, but on to the next thing, it's just not the right time. You know, when you're doing all these things, you're not disrupting people. You're talking to people, you're communicating with people. People know you to be kind, calm, cool, collected person. You don't like to like present yourself or move in a way that's not graceful. You know, you like to leave on good terms with people too. You don't like to leave shit on bad terms. You try to be the one to leave shit on good terms when you leave a situation. people like you and recognize you for your, peace loving, calm, cool, and collectedness as you're doing shit. You try to be calm, cool, and collected, composed when you're doing stuff. You ain't always the loud one. You can be at times. You can be the one that's very passionate at times when you find something you love and, that feel the need to, like, talk about it. Then you are that person. That part of you comes out. And it does come out. Not always. Because you like to learn different things. And you do. Libra is somebody who likes to create balance in their life. I don't want to always be aggressive, or I don't want to always not be, doing anything at all, just being there, I want to be aggressive, then I want to, not be, always the most aggressive. Certain situations call for different things, but, you try to strive for balance. People like that about you. You kind of like angry at that avatar. You got to remember that. People like you because of that. Because for them, they ain't really looking for balance in life. They like, chaos and shit like that. That's what you do. You try for, balance. You know, you don't shy away from talking to people either. So, people, appreciate that. You consider other people before taking steps, usually. As somebody who has displacement. That's you know, um, pro and a con, though, if you ask me. But other people, um, you might have kids with people too. Since it's in the fifth house, people, recognize you more. Like your specific, Libra and Mars energy. Anyways, the next sign is Scorpio Mars in the fifth house. Scorpio Mars in the fifth house. Well, we know Scorpio to be about what they desire. Deep down, that's what they're striving for. That's what they're, seeking in this life. They don't really give a fuck about your feelings. They're focused on their feelings towards what they gotta accomplish. But they understand too. They ain't like not wise or anything like that. They're intuitive. They understand that other people have, feelings, emotions. What I'm saying here is they ain't gonna let somebody else's feelings and emotions dictate how they move. When they have a goal and they're trying to, go after it, they can go after it. They don't give a fuck how that happens. They'll make that shit happen, come hell or high water. They'll move in silence. They don't give a fuck if you know or not. You'll still know. Like they like they have that kind of aura and shit. People are Scorpio or Mars and Scorpio. So basically, when you're about doing something, you're like, I'm doing this. I'm, building this. I'm, seeing these people. But, that's what I do. You don't explain yourself too much. It's just like your energy explains it. Your results speak for themselves, kind of thing. You know. But also you could be violent at times. You know, people who don't understand, keep coming. When you might have told them to back the fuck off. I don't do that kind of thing. They insist on trying to find you. Then you snap back and let loose on them. Even in a relationship, certain type of sexual kind of relationship, you might bite back when somebody tries to leave you because it was just one of those things to them that was, not like that. They just wanted you for, some time. They didn't want you for, ever. Or for, an extended period of time like that. And you'll get upset. And you'll, because you like to have control in the relationship too. Relationships too. But that's the thing, some might get away from you, but the ones that stay, you like that though. And you like that they submit to your, what you desire, what you want to accomplish, you know, and they like you too because you work with an intensity. You don't always have to be seen, and you actually respect or you value your privacy. And I like people like that. I like people who, have Scorpio energy too because they value privacy. You know, you won't say too much. You'll say what needs to be said and other things. Hey, man, you don't need to fucking know. I respect that about those guys and girls. You know, whether you believe me or not, I'm being so honest about that. Because some people who are like introverts, they don't, because they like all that shit out there. When it's like none of their damn business. And then like that is on front with you. If you specifically have Scorpio and Mars in the fifth house, though, that is on front. Like even if you don't want it to be, it is, but it still works to your benefit. You know, it's like you don't want people in your business, people still try to be in your business. Or you feel that way. You know, and it's like, damn, you're interested in me, but you're not approaching this situation right. Intense because when you set out for your goals, you're not, going this way or that way. I like to think about Zoro because I happen to know Zoro is a Scorpio, the character Zoro. He wants to be the most powerful swordsman in the world. He's like focused on that. He's not focused on other things. Now he's a pirate too, so at times he does do some things like that, but it's because he has a deep connection to his captain though too. His relationships matter as well. It's not like they don't. He's like, take me. He understands his role as a, vice captain. And his goals supersede mine, but I'm still gonna fight, And he didn't like just give himself to Kuma. He was trying to fight first, even though he knew he was fighting a losing battle. These people don't, do shit like that. They always fight for, what they're trying to accomplish, and they'll fight for the people that they care about too. But it's a little more, dangerous than the Aries, if you ask me, because at least they let you know. Somebody who moves like a Scorpio, you won't know. You'll just know shit's happening. That kind of thing. But they don't just do that for everybody. You gotta earn that with them. You really gotta earn that shit with them. Like, but people respect them for that, and they like their intensity, the intensity they bring to a situation. When they're working with people, it's like challenging people to like do you really like go after what you want? And it's like not something they necessarily say or bring up, but it's like I'm not fucking with you because you're not somebody who's like goal driven and other things, and that turns me off. And it's something that extroverts and other people who are not of the Scorpio has to understand. They don't like you because you're not like them, and they are. Now, the next sign, and you probably have kids too. Scorpio is one of the more sexual signs, by the way. So the next, and if you have Scorpio Mars in the fifth house and you're of any sign, could be any sign with this placement, you probably have some kids. Anyways, but you would, do the best to protect them. My kids are not your business kind of thing, so you probably, decent parents too. But anyways, um, the next sign is Sagittarius in the fifth house. Sagittarius in the fifth house, they're a fun person to be around. They like to have fun. They like to go after, new experiences. They won't let anything hold them back from doing that kind of thing. When they set their mind to what they want to do, they see it, they go after it, they attack it. That could be, females, that could be men, that could be, you know, certain fun activities they want to challenge themselves at, sports, you know, any kind of thing that they want to experience in this life. They ain't gonna let shit slow them down. They're just gonna do it. They don't give a fuck about the like explanations, the like, you know, all this and that. You know, let's just do it. Let's have fun. Let's make it happen. You know, um, the talking and shit doesn't really need to be a thing. You know, let's just do this thing. You know, if you want the smoke, we can get that too. You know, these people like to, you know, will fight if they have to, and they will. You know, and they like to see the more positive things in life. So if they're fighting you, it's probably because you didn't see, or might have thought that you, or you made them think that um, you were telling them that, you know, they can't achieve their goals, or they can't, or they shouldn't do this or shouldn't do that. You know, they don't really deal in that kind of shit, right? They see the positive in things. They like to, you know, expand their horizons, right? They like to learn new things, too. Um, and they're, you know, I would say they're quick at picking things up. You know, these people, um, they don't mean they're the best at, you know, what they do, but like they focus more on like the shit they like. So then the shit they like, they're more loud and, you know, this is what I do. You know, come have fun with me, that kind of thing. You know, and then when I'm like done with, you know, entertaining this idea, I'm going to entertain, you know, some other things. You know, this other vision that I have. You know, which is basically the same thing, but it's, you know, when I look at life as, you know, it's a game, but it's, you know, serious too. You know, like I said, these people can fight at times. They can be aggressive at times when they feel like their beliefs are being attacked, or, um, you know, you're trying to stop them from experiencing something that they've always wanted to do, or just decided they wanted to do. It didn't matter. They ain't gonna like you, you know, trying to slow them the fuck down, box them in. They don't like shit like that. You know, this person definitely doesn't think before doing, but it's actually to their benefit. You know, in that, you know, because like you can talk yourself out of things. They will never talk themselves out of doing anything. They'll do things. They don't mind looking like a fool. They don't give a fuck about that because they're experiencing things in life, and people who have experience, you know, they make it. You know, they win. Yeah, that has to deal with seizing opportunities, being positive because, and then they have more confidence because they've done so many different things, right? They've hang out with these kind of people, these kind of people. They've had these kind of jobs, this kind of job. You know, they've fucked with these kind of girls, these kind of guys. Fucked with, you know, they dibble and dabble in a lot of different things. You know, they try to, you know, because life is meant to, you know, experience all things like that. So they would never get tied down by like one person. But because they like to experience things, these people do probably have children with people, and they're also very creative, so they're fun. But in order to like stay fun and stay, you know, positive, they got to do different things. So it would never be like just into one thing. So let's say they're into something right now. In a year or two, they won't be into that. They'll be into something else, and they will hate people who try to keep them in that, you know, time kind of, you know, environment. Let's say they were into football, and then they switched to boxing, and then they switched to skiing. You know, that kind of thing. You know, their football friends are all like, "Oh, you don't want to play football anymore." I don't give a fuck. You know, we'll fucking throw hands right now, because I'm gonna become a boxer instead. You know, I want to do that. Um, you know, then they go from boxing to, you know, skating, and they're like, "What the fuck are you going to skating for?" You know, I'll throw hands with you. You know, I'll throw hands with you. You know, I'm skating because I want to fucking skate. I want to learn how to skate. You know, these people, they don't wait on that shit either. They don't really give a fuck about your opinion. It's like they'll fight you if you try to stop them. Kind but yeah, they're fun, and people like them. Girls, like the opposite sex usually likes them and shit, right? So they probably have kids and stuff too. But the next sign is Capricorn Mars. Now Capricorn Mars is also an intense sign, but a very real sign. This is the exaltation point of Mars. This is in the fifth house, so people know that you're about your business, and when you set your sights on a goal and the things you want to have, you mean that. Um, so guess what? Um, you will cut people off when necessary. You'll have a friend group and you'll have to cut some people off. You'll be like, hey man, I don't give a fuck about you no more. You're trying to drag me down. The goal is this, not that. You know, you're kind of like a captain in that way. If you have a friend group, maybe you have to cut all your fucking friends off sometimes. Um, in certain situations, and then get a whole bunch of new friends who will, listen to what you have to say because the necessary steps that are needed to be taken to have fun, in a way that is, still fun, but won't get us, fucked up by like the law and other things. Um, you also, like, you have that sense of urgency, right? So, you'll do whatever it takes, you will not, if you have to cut off, fucking around, you'll do that. And then once you achieve your goals and other things, and you kind of can, like, flaunt what you achieve, but you're not even flaunting it. It's like, because this is like an earth sign, like in Capricorn's earth sign. Now you might flaunt though if you're like a fire sign or an extrovert. um but it's like, I achieved those things because I wanted to. I put in the hard work and the effort to, get that. I probably was, learned something about a certain career and wanted to be the best at it, so I can make my money, and then have all the things I want from that, Learn from people when necessary, learn from people, take that information in, and then get to the next thing, get to the next thing, get to the next thing. You're always a busy person. This person is. You're never gonna slow down for shit. There's always, like, again, there's always something to do. You know, um, and you like see things in a real way, right? So Earth signs see, they deal in realistic things that are tangible of the physical world. Um, that's why people like respect you and listen to you and come to you for advice and on all this other thing because. And it might be annoying for you at times too, because you might be trying to still work and, like, build more, but then, you also like it because, they see that you sacrifice, time, and even had to, cut friends off at, points in your life to achieve these goals. And you also don't care about any of that because you know what you were capable of. You went out, you got it, you grounded hard, and now you live big. You live in large. You know, and let's say you lose everything, you still don't doubt yourself. I'll just, work hard and grind again, because you know that life goes through ups and downs. Because of those, times when I had to cut people off before. You'll do it again, and you'll, rebuild, and you make it back even quicker actually, because you learn things, living your life. But you don't like bullshit. You don't like people who, slow you down when you got something to do, or people who are too, about too much other shit. When the goal is this, the goal is that. And these are the necessary steps to get there. There's no other things. There's no deviating from that. And then you just do it. You know, It's loud. It don't start out as a loud thing, because you don't always have shit right away. But once you start accumulating the cars, the houses, the fucking nice suits, and all that shit, and you ain't even like flaunting it necessarily, you know. Now, if you're a fire sign or a wind sign, you probably are flaunting it more because you like to talk. But if you are like water or earth signs, you probably ain't flaunting it that much. It's just like this is what it is. When you're like this is what it is. I did this to get there. If you don't like that, fuck you. That is just what it is. That's what you have to do to get there. And that's you people, and people like you because you're successful in the businesses you try to grow and career paths that you go down. You make sure that you know the most of in that career field, and you try to be the best worker in that career field. You like to work hard and you know everything about that, so you're knowledgeable, and people respect you for that, and they really do, and they recognize you for it. Now the next person is Aquarius, Mars in the fifth house. Aquarius, Mars in the fifth house. You can be unpredictable at times. You'll hang out from these people, you'll learn from these people, you'll learn from those people. You'll talk to these people and talk to these people. Of course, you have people that you actually, are friends with and you like to network with more, but you also, you have an open mind too. But with that open mind comes, scatteredness. Scatteredness. You know, you might be interested in multiple things. Learning about it, from these people, maybe. Giving your opinions on such matters. You know, but talking, and doing, talking amongst people is a great thing to do. See, now that it's in the fifth house, though, people know that you know you for getting in contact with these people, and then you have that strong connection with those contacts that you can call when shit goes wrong. I know I can call this person for this because I've talked to them and we've hit it off really well. I can call this person for my money. I can call this person to have fun. I can call this person to learn about this. I can call this person to learn about that. I can run these ideas by these people and they won't get sideways with me. They'll actually challenge me, and I also try to see it my way. Maybe if they want to, if they don't want to, that's fine too. I also like people who think for themselves. Um, People who don't, I still might try to interact with just to understand that kind of their kind of thinking a little bit. Doesn't mean I agree with it. It just what makes you think that kind of you seek human interaction through communication. And then the people you can communicate with the best, those are the people you make your ends with, your money, your sexual needs can get met. You're good at talking, so and you like people who want to talk to you. That leads to other things, sexual things, if it's the opposite sex, right? They like you because you can think for yourself and you can pose ideas, challenge, and you like to challenge people, mentally. Make them think twice about what they're doing or what they, should be doing, that kind of thing. You try to be a trendsetter sometimes, especially with this place when you try to be a trendsetter. You try to, do new things. You're a little bit creative in your own unique way. Um, I wouldn't say this is the best Mars placement to have, but since it's in the fifth house, people will find you and you'll connect with the people you want to connect with, the types of people you want to connect with. So then you can, achieve the goals you want to achieve. You want to have this following on the internet, you probably have, you're probably like, doing like social media shit like me, and other people, right? If you have Aquarius, Mars in the fifth house, and then you're probably known too. you know, and you're probably known for like talking to and with other people, not just, talking for the sake of talking, but talking to other people and connecting with other people, collaborating with other people, in the, areas that you talk about. And of course, you think before you do shit. Sometimes you will take a risk, though. As an Aquarius Mars, you will throw all the logic out the window sometimes. Sometimes you will. Um, just to, like, throw people off because they're like, oh, you think about things before doing things. You would never. Oh, what? You just, did something in a, more aggressive, assertive way. And I wasn't, I thought you would, think more, talk more with other people. And you just decided to go ahead and do something. You like to, keep people on their fucking toes, and you keep doing shit like that because people gotta think a little bit and shit, and you do that with how you move because you have, if you have the Mars in Aquarius in the fifth house, then you're known to do shit like that. You gotta keep people, Do you still have a brain over there? That kind of thing. Now the next sign is, and the last one too, Pisces Mars in the fifth house. Pisces Mars in the fifth house. You are a very caring person too. You have a way of following your gut instincts too. However, you achieve your goals. You don't always gotta be the loudest, but you show compassion for other people, right? And you try to, come off that way. But you also want people to fucking, understand you and be compassionate towards you. So you might even get aggressive sometimes, right? Because they ain't. You don't like people who ain't like you like that. But you also try to not, you know, be that way because you understand, that kind of shit. Shit can come back to get you. In certain situations though, maybe somebody you care deeply for is being fucked with by somebody. You ain't gonna just, you like to be that hero. You like to be that defender. You like to be that hero kind of thing. I like to say that about y'all. Especially if it's in Mars, you will, fight for your friends. You're like cool bar from you, off the show. You don't give a fuck about the odds or anything. You're like, I'm a man. I'll stand up. I'll do what I have to do. I'll take on their pain. That kind of shit. Um, and then people like respect you for that shit. They're like, God damn, man, you almost died. You didn't have to fucking do that. Calm down. We respect you. You know, uh, where other people, don't have that compassion for other human beings and shit. You do. A bit manipulative sometimes, when not using that kind of way. Um, but you achieve your goals. You know, you don't let shit slow you down. You know, let's say that you don't want to feel a certain kind of way. You're gonna look for energy that's, positive. You're gonna try to make yourself positive, though. You're gonna try to make yourself positive. Because then, if you go into a situation, you have that negative energy. People can sense that from you. And they'll be like, "Oh shit, I don't think I want you around." And you'll know. You'll be like, "Oh fuck," because they might sense that intention. But then you also know that some people are, gullible. So you'll, manipulate people. Not all the time, when you're like this, you're more of that compassionate hero, like Kuwabara. Maybe not even like Kuwabara, but like, Goku. He beats those people's asses, right? And he's like, he's bitching at Vegeta because he's like, damn, Vegeta, you didn't have to kill them. You can beat their fucking ass if you want to. Well, you don't have to kill them, If they get back up and try shit again, we can put them in the hospital again, you know. Well, maybe the second time around you might have to put them down or whatever. But in real life, you're probably just gonna, fight that person if they want that, second round with you. You'll do it. But you usually fight them because of, a strong feeling you have, and you also don't like to be limited. Also, you don't have a limited mindset either. You like to experience everything life has to offer, just like the Sagittarius does. The difference being, though, is that you're a little more cooler than they are. You're a little more calm, or you come off that way, to like introverts and even other extroverts, or extroverts. You might be more of a listener type. Seem like, when I say that, you have that kind of aura about you that it's like, you can take on a different persona at any given time. You're dreamy to the girls or the guys, you can assume different roles and, have that play to your advantage. And you like to, feel all kinds of things. You won't turn somebody away just because they have negative. Let's say you're the one who's bothered. You want to try to, be that fucking hero, save them. That could play out in, negative ways, but sometimes it plays out in positive ways, and you actually do save somebody from a situation. You step in and you become that hero for somebody else. Because that's the way you move. You move like a savior. You try to be like that sometimes. You're very creative. People like you for that. You appreciate the arts. You are an artist. You like art, music, poetry. You might even be a romantic. You might be romanticized by people for how you move. That just comes with, the kind of guts you have. And anyways, that was Mars and all the signs in the fifth house, as told by Darius the Green Angel. Be cool, call in the corner, and I'll have Jupiter next week. Jupiter in the fifth house next week. And natal readings at $350. That's your astrological birth chart, and all your aspects, house placements, and specific degrees. I don't use the equal house system. I use the, what your actual houses look like. For example, my house is, I have a big ass first house and seventh house, and then my smaller houses are my sixth house, my fifth house, my 12th and 11th house are small. Everybody's different. It all comes down, and then I also have your numerology reading with that. That's why it's $350. All I need is date of birth, place of birth, time of birth, and then your full name, so I can make that accurate, numerology reading for you too. And that's between you and me. Anyways, be cool, call in the corner if you want one of those. Get in contact with me through my email. It's in my description on YouTube. And I'll need that in cash right now. Alright, y'all. Be cool, call in the corner.